So welcome everyone this morning to our Wheel and Anchor webinar on Scotland by Sea. This is our adventure from Dublin to Edinburgh that will take place in May of 2021. This program is being, I would have said repeated, but it's been actually postponed from 2020 for reasons that I'm sure I don't need to explain. And we are very much looking forward to be going there next year, given that we weren't able to attend this year. So for those of you who are new to Wheel and Anchor, let me give you a little bit of a brief synopsis of what we are all about. We're a travel community. So we're really about bringing travelers together. And I sort of define travelers, or we all define ourselves as people who are passionate about seeing the world, not just through the lens of mass tourism, but to try to get a little bit of a deeper understanding by meeting local people, by going to more out of the way places, and by traveling a little bit more slowly than a lot of sort of tour groups do. So that is our motto at Wheel and Anchor. And my personal goal for all of our members is to become well-traveled and well-connected. And so when we say well-traveled, it's not just about checking off your bucket list. It's to say, oh, I've been here, I've been there. And, you know, I did a bus tour through Europe and I was in 8 countries in 12 days kind of thing. But it's really about having a broader understanding of regions of the world, of people, and becoming connected and grounded. And it's interesting because our whole company brand logo, Wheel and Anchor, the wheel is all about motion and moving and traveling, and the anchor is about connection and being grounded. So I think that it's the synergy that we're sort of trying to promote in our tours. So joining me on our webinar this morning, as per usual. So I'm Gordon, I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor. I recognize, I think, just about everybody on our webinar this morning. And I'm joined by Joel Curry, who is my right-hand man, co-founder of Wheel and Anchor and does our technical support, and as well as Paula Zarnick, who is our senior trip specialist. Joel and Paula will be in the background this morning, but there to answer any of your questions either during the webinar or subsequent to it. Today, the plan is all about satisfying that curiosity we have about Scotland. And this time it's by sea, which is a unique way to travel around Scotland because, of course, mostly we would think about going there overland, but it has such a tremendous coastline that we get to cover a lot of ground that would be impossible to do in this period of time. We're doing it by land. I am your guide and planning to be the host for this tour as well, as I was planning to this year. And for me, it's always an exploration together with our members to find, you know, neat places that are both in the itinerary and the surprises that we undoubtedly see along the way. And we're going to be visiting the Scottish coastline, as I said, in May of 2021. So talking about Scotland as a whole, it has a tremendous amount of coastline. And I think that until you actually sort of take a closer look at the map, you don't realize that there's 16,000 kilometers, which I think if you drew it all out, it's like the distance from Edinburgh all the way to Australia is how much coastline they have in Scotland. Very rough, wild coastline. You know, Scotland isn't exactly known for its weather, but it lends, I think, a certain it lends a certain character to the Scottish people, as well as, of course, to the Scotch whiskey itself, and to the whole dynamic of this very fascinating environment. Scotland is warmed or partially warmed by the Gulf Stream, which of course passes up and keeps the whole western coast of Europe warm all the way up. And so you actually see quite an abundant amount of wildlife in the waters off the Scottish coastline. And that would be part of the bonus that, again, you don't normally associate Scotland with marine life, but there's lots of it there. So let's take a more in-depth look at our map and where it is that we're going. The program, even though it's all about Scotland, actually starts in Ireland. is where we will embark upon our ship, and we'll sail up, first up the west coast of Ireland, through the Hebrides and Isle of Skye, and then we'll go up to the north and we'll visit the Shetlands and the Orkneys, which are in and of themselves very remote places to get to. So to be able to cover all this ground on one itinerary, I think makes it particularly unique and remarkable. And we will end up the cruise in Aberdeen and then spend our last couple of nights in Edinburgh, which is truly, truly a remarkable city. One of probably, I think, my favorite city in the British Isles. I love Scotland. I love Edinburgh. So let's look at our day-by-day itinerary. So we're going to head off next year on May the 19th. So it's almost exactly 1 year from now. And we'll arrive, of course, in Dublin then on the following day, on the 20th of May. And we get to spend a whole day here. We will have a local guide to show us around a little bit. And Dublin is a fun city, and I think it's a few people for this year had booked in to arrive a couple of nights early, because Dublin is just another one of these great European cities that you could spend tons of time in. So we'll have time while we're there. We'll see, the famous landmark, St. Stephen's Green with Trinity College, and Grafton Street, of course, and then the area known as Temple Bar, where you can't really go to Ireland and tub to Dublin without sampling a pint of Guinness or maybe a little Irish coffee or something like that. I'm not a big Guinness fan myself, but I know a lot of people swear by it. So all of those things will be part of our adventure, and we'll have a good afternoon there, depending on when everyone arrives, as well as most of the following day before we embark our ship, which we will do on the 21st of May. And this will be our home for the majority of this program, the MS Ocean Atlantic, which is part of the Albatross Expeditions fleet. And what I like about Albatross, I've been actually working together with them for quite some time. In fact, I know the owner. It's a family-owned business, and he is a great expedition leader himself, and has traveled extensively in Antarctic and Arctic regions with this and the other vessels that are part of the Albatross group. And this ship is really purpose-built for expedition type cruising. So this isn't a large cruise ship. This is a medium-sized ship. It has space for about 200 passengers. Sorry, I got the number wrong. 198 passengers. And so but yet it has a tremendous amount of space. So you feel like there's lots of room on board, but you don't have a lot of the bells and whistles that the big cruise ships have. Nor do we want them. We're here. The ship is our method of transportation from getting from point to point. And as I say, the reason that we're cruising through Scotland on this particular vessel is because she is actually repositioning between her winter season in Antarctica and the summer season in the Arctic regions. So there's lots on board to do. The cabins are very comfortable, and it's a wonderful staff that are from all over the world. But as I say, it's a Danish-owned fleet, so it has that sort of Scandinavian flavor to it. So that's the MS Ocean Atlantic, a perfect ship for our voyage around Scotland. So we will spend our first night on board, having sailed out of Dublin, and we will end up on the Kintyre Peninsula at a place called Campbelltown. Now, Campbelltown is in a very remote part of Scotland. In fact, if you had to drive there from Edinburgh, because it's sort of at the very end of a long and narrow peninsula, it would take you sort of hours and hours and days. And as a result, a lot of people don't actually visit Campbelltown. I mean, they do. They get their fair share of tourism that's mostly local. But the main reason that you would visit Campbelltown is likely because you are a whiskey buff. And we certainly make a number of stops at some very famous distilleries all around Scotland. But Campbelltown has perhaps one of the longest history of whiskey, and it's actually one of the smallest whiskey regions, and I'll talk about that in a second, in Scotland. And they have a distillery here called Springbank. So it's not one of the more famous ones, unless you're a real whiskey connoisseur, where we will have time to do a tour and a tasting for those that are interested. But the town has actually a lot of interesting World War II history, and you can see some remnants of that. They've got a very cool heritage center, and as you're sailing in, you get to see this wonderful lighthouse. If you get up bright and early in the morning, we'll be docking first thing in the morning. Let me take a moment to tell you a little bit about Scotland, as I just mentioned, the whiskey regions, because you can't really visit Scotland without getting to understand a little bit about Scotch whiskey. Whether or not you're a fan or a connoisseur, or whether you're just just generally interested in the principle of Scottish whiskey, there are 5 regions, and as I just mentioned, Campbelltown is one of the oldest and one of the original ones, and it's also one of the smallest regions, because it's just the end of that narrow peninsula, as you see colored in purple on the map. And the Scottish whiskey regions, I mean, the whole production of Scotch whiskey is very protected, much like champagne is, or cognac in France, or Guinness for that matter in stout in Ireland. They are very, very protective of this label, this moniker of Scotch whiskey. So we're going to be visiting on this trip. We're actually going to be stopping in all of these regions except for Speyside, where so we'll hit a little bit of the Highlands, the Lowlands, Islay, Campbelltown, as well as the islands, which are actually considered to be a sub-region of the Highland type malt. So I'll get into that and the names of some of the distilleries they're going to be visiting as we go through the itinerary. But this gives you a little bit of an overview about Scotch whiskey, and it's even if you're not a big whiskey fan, it's really quite fascinating to understand. So without further ado, we will sail then up from Campbelltown. We will be making our way up the west coast, and we're going to be heading first of all to Islay. And Islay has this charming little town called Port Ellen, which is where we will land. This is one of the spots we have to go to. We have to disembark the ship by Zodiac. And once again, it makes this trip a bit unique because you can't do this itinerary in a large cruise ship because there's simply no place for them to moor, and there's no way they could disembark all those people using ship's tenders. So we will get off on a Zodiac boat and we'll cruise up to shore with our little outboard engine, and it's really kind of neat as you arrive into this charming little town, and you will smell the peat drifting out of the town and out of the hills, because and this is how you'll be your first indication that you actually arrived into whiskey country, because you can't ignore it. And when we arrive there, we're going to do some touring around the countryside. We're going to see a 1,300-year-old Celtic cross, which is in the middle of a cemetery, and you'll stand there and it'll feel like a scene right out of the movie Highlander. It's really, really quite remarkable. There are 3 distilleries, whiskey distilleries in Port Ellen, and they're all actually side by side. These names, for those of you who are whiskey lovers, will be more familiar: Ardbeg, Lafroig, and Lagavulin. And I can honestly say Lagavulin is my personal favorite whiskey. In fact, I'm going to show you. I've got a bottle right here. That's how much I like Port Ellen, and not that I always have a whiskey bottle in close proximity, but it just so happens that I do now. So, so that'll be our visit to Islay and to Port Ellen, and from here we make our way up to the Isle of to Oban and the Isle of Mull, and as well as the island of Ophiona. And our gateway to this particular area is this terrific, colorful little town of Tobermory. And again, as I said before, what is really neat about this trip is that we're covering ground that would simply take you a long time to do if you had to do it overland, because the coastline of Scotland is like Norway. It's all jutted out, fjords and a rugged coastline, and the roads don't go everywhere. So it's like one day you're in Campbelltown, and then you're in Islay, and next thing you know, we're up here on the Isle of Mull. So we're going to arrive into Oban, and we're going to have a full day excursion that's going to take us across the Firth. The Firth is like a river that goes into the sea, and visit Tobermory, which is super picturesque. The picture here doesn't even do it justice, but we'll get a bit of history from the MacLean clan, and as you will remember, again, I think about this Highlander movie, which I remember. I mean, it's so long ago, but for me, it just drove up all of these impressions of what Scotland back in the day was like. So we'll visit this Duart Castle, which was the home of the MacLean clan and dates back well over 700 years. And we'll get a real feeling for the flavor of this ancient culture that was up here. And then by the end of the day, we'll head back to Oban, which is where we will re-embark on the ship, and we'll have this very, very picturesque sailing that will take us out of the harbor as we, as I say, continue up now, heading more to gradually heading over to the northeast, and going to the Isle of Skye. And the Isle of Skye is one of those places that you've probably heard of. You've probably even seen this picture. I won't say it's not unique to us. It's one of the most famous pictures from the Isle of Skye. And and Skye is the largest of the Hebrides Islands. It is more popular amongst tourists. It's a little bit more accessible, although you do have to take a ferry across there. If you're coming from the mainland, once again, we get to arrive right in at Portree, which is the largest town of the Hebrides and of the island. Once again, landing by Zodiac, which adds to the adventure of all this. It's very easy getting in and out of these Zodiac boats. It's not too much of a challenge, because we are landing at, we're not landing like in Antarctica on the side of an iceberg or something like that. So we're going to take a beautiful tour around Skye and see incredible coastal scenery, much like what you see here. We'll get to visit here Dunvegan Castle. So yesterday, the day prior, we were at Duart Castle, which was the home of the MacLean clan. Well, this is where the MacLeods were. The MacLeods and the MacLeans, these feuding clans that are such an important part of Scottish history. This whole area is literally the second most visited place in all of Scotland, next to Edinburgh. This will be the day when you want to make sure your camera is charged up. There's only one distillery here, so Talisker, that we will pay a visit to. And of course, this is again part of the Islands whiskies, which is part of the Highland variety of single malt scotches for those who are into their Scotch whiskey. So we'll leave then the northern coast of Scotland for what I'm looking forward to as the most exciting part of the trip, partly because I love sort of remote places. And the Orkney and Shetland Islands are two archipelagos situated quite far to the north of the Scottish mainland. In fact, the Shetland Islands are closer to Norway than they are to Scotland, even though they belong to the UK. And these islands are known for, so if we had amazing scenery before on the Scottish mainland, it gets even better in visiting the Orkneys and the Shetlands. The Orkneys have these vertical walls, these vertical cliff walls with sea stacks. That is the picture on the top right there, these outcroppings of rock that jut out of the sea. Truly, truly magical. And they have tons and tons of islands in these archipelagos. I think there's something like 22,000, but really very, very few people live up here, which is what makes it so appealing, because you're in an environment that's part of the UK, and yet it couldn't be further from the urban environments or even the rural environments of the southern part of the British Isles. so yeah, it's just remarkable too. So we'll get a good view driving around through the Orkneys, the Orkney and the Shetland Islands. When we arrive here, we'll the most famous site that we're going to go to is Skye, which looks a little bit like a pile of rocks on here, but Skye is a very windy spot. I mean, in this particular part of the Orkneys, you can see how flat and undulating the landscape is. So the winds just blow across the Atlantic. So, as you can see, everybody in the picture has got a good wind jacket on. But this 5,000-year-old settlement is actually older than Stonehenge. And it was only by coincidence that they even discovered the place back in the latter part of the 19th century. They have, of course, a whiskey up here as well in Kirkwall called Highland Park. Again, a name that you're probably familiar with. It's in fact the most northerly located whiskey distillery in all of Scotland. And we'll also have here a little more time to explore Kirkwall. And this is the kind of place you want to write a postcard and send it to, because how many times do you get a postcard from somebody from the Orkney Islands? So after spending a wonderful day up there, we continue even further north up to the Shetland Islands. Now, the Shetland Islands are, as I say, roughly 160 kilometers north of the Scottish mainland. So they're quite far up, and you can get to Norway. You could swim to Norway quicker than you could swim back to Scotland. And when we get into Lerwick, we're going to see a number of different things, but you can't visit the Shetland Islands without seeing the Shetland ponies. These mini horses have been on the islands for over 4,000 years, and as you may well know, although it's surprising some people aren't aware, these horses are actually only about 3 feet tall, but they're super strong, so they can pull more than twice their weight. So they were often used back in the day for hauling coal carriages and that sort of thing. And nowadays, of course, they are sent all over the world to be used as show ponies. While we're there as well in the Shetland Islands, we're going to visit the Broch of Clickaman, and a Broch, probably not even saying it with the right accent, but is one of these structures that dates back to the Iron Age, and you see them sort of scattered around in Scotland. But these are some of the oldest structures that you can find anywhere in the British Isles, and so you get this combination between dramatic scenery, between a very unique and friendly people that live way up in the Shetland Islands. I guess they have to be friendly. They don't get to see tourists all that often, as well as, of course, as our Shetland ponies. So having reached the northernmost part of our tour, our ship will then set sail to head back south, and we will arrive then in Aberdeen on the morning of May the 28th, and that'll be the point at which we disembark from our ship from the ocean Atlantic and say goodbye to our crew, and we'll be picked up here in Aberdeen and brought down to St. Andrews. And I love St. Andrews. I remember actually going there when I was backpacking across Europe back in, we won't even say it, the early 1990s, very early 1990s. And I was very taken by St. Andrews because, of course, it is the home of golf, with the famous St. Andrews Links, where they held the Open, or they still hold the Open. But there's a lot more to St. Andrews than just golf, of course. And we'll spend a few hours touring this very historic town, in particular the cathedral there, which is something like 500 years old, and it has this very, very cool dungeon. You have to see it for yourself. I'm not gonna ruin the secret about what that's all about. So by the time we leave Aberdeen in the morning and spend lunch and then spend a few hours in St. Andrews, we'll arrive in Edinburgh in the afternoon and have a chance just to stroll around in anticipation of our last full day on the trip. And as I said, Edinburgh is probably my favorite city in all of the British Isles, partly because the the famous Edinburgh Castle that you see here in the picture, which sits at the end of the Royal Mile, is just such a dramatic structure. The architecture here is, for me, it's sort of somewhere between London, like Southern English style architecture and French style architecture. So it's a beautiful, beautiful city, and we will spend a whole day walking around downtown. So we'll have a guided tour for a good chunk of the day. We'll visit, of course, the castle, and as well as just checking out all of the neat buildings. And if you didn't get to try all the whiskeys along the way, and if you like that kind of thing, they have these amazing like whiskey tasting shops throughout Edinburgh that are really kind of neat. And if you're not a whiskey person, because this isn't entirely a whiskey tour, there are many other things to do. And not least of which is this new dynamic earth pavilion, which is, for those of you that are from Toronto area, it's kind of like the Science Center, but it's a much more modern version of it. I actually haven't seen this before because it only opened since the last time I was in Scotland, but it's become a real favorite among people that have visited, from what I have heard. If you are a big fan of the Royals, you'll probably have to go to Holyrood House, which is the home of the British Royals whenever they're visiting in town. But of course, Edinburgh is also the home of J.K. Rowling, and where she wrote most of her books while she was living in Edinburgh. And Edinburgh, of course, being famous as well for some major festivals, not least of which is the original Fringe Festival, which still happens every year in Edinburgh. So that will be our time there. I can well imagine we had some of our members who indicated that they were going to stay on for a few more days to explore more of Edinburgh, and even go over to Glasgow, which is only a short train ride away. Failing which, we'll be heading back to Canada as our trip winds up on the 30th of May of 2021. So let me give you a few of the logistical details about our program. Of course, I am well aware that we, in the midst of everything that's going on right now, that we're not exactly getting a flurry of booking activity, but I'm sure it will come soon. This trip is a year away, and so we do hope you'll join us. So the programs this year, it starts at $69.90 Canadian, based on double occupancy for a category, so-called Category D cabin. And all the details on this you can find in our brochure, which we will send you a copy of course, along with the copy of this, a replay of this webinar. Included in that, as always, pretty much everything that you need along the way. So we don't include all the meals while on land, because particularly in a place like Edinburgh that has such a plethora of excellent restaurants, and one likes to choose on one's own what it is that you'd like to have for dinner. But on the ship, certainly all of your meals are included, all of the excursions that we've described, and then the guiding, the entrance fees. So we make it so that you don't have to sort of reach into your pocket every 5 minutes, but because most of the things that are on this trip are included. The only important things to note that you have to look after are, first of all, airfare, which we can certainly assist you with, as well as travel insurance, any other places that you may want to visit along the way, particularly in Glasgow, in Dublin, and Edinburgh, and those few other meals and so on that are not otherwise in the program. So that itinerary. One more thing, airfare. So the airfares we're happy to arrange for you, or you can do them yourself. At the time that we put this all together, your flights into Dublin and returning from Edinburgh were sort of around about the $900 to $1,000 mark from Eastern Canada, a little bit more if you're traveling from Western Canada. I will advise that airfares will likely be fluctuating in the next couple of months, just because of the fallout from the pandemic situation as airlines get back on stream. But I do anticipate that by the last quarter of this year, we'll be back to stabilizing airfares, at least for mid next year. So If you have any questions at all about the program, I'm about to do our usual Q&A session. But of course, if something comes up that you didn't think of while on the webinar, then you can obviously send me an email, or Paula, who you can reach at bookings@wheelandanchor.ca, or give us a call. We always love to get calls from our members. So let me take a few of the questions that I have received already, as well as we had a couple of people email questions in who were not able to join the presentation. So let me just take a minute and call those up. Trevor asked us, how's the weather going to be? Well, Trevor, it's Scotland and it's May. Although it doesn't really matter whether it's May or July or January, because in Scotland it could always be dreich, which is a Scottish term for sort of lousy. I won't say that. May is actually one of the driest months, if there is such a thing, in Scotland. But you can anticipate that there will be some Scotch mist, as they say. There'll be a mix of weather between rain and sun and temperature. Okay, so it looks like we had a technical problem here. Okay, so we're it's back. Good. And then we have a question here from Tracy. She says, I've been to Edinburgh a few times. Can you recommend an interesting extension other than Edinburgh? Yes, I can, Tracy. So Glasgow for sure is one that you could do, which is a short trip. You could even do it in a day and come back. Stirling is another city that's literally about 40 minutes from Edinburgh, and the Stirling Castle is one of the best UNESCO castles anywhere, and it's quite close by to Edinburgh. If you're looking at going a little further afield, there's so much more in the interior of Scotland that you could see. You could go up to Loch Ness and Inverness, or Loch Lomond, or you could go sort of back over to the western part of Scotland and head for Fort William to climb up Ben Nevis, which has always been on my list of mountains to climb, and it's a day trip. So that's all the kinds of things you can do. Now, of course, with Scottish Rail and with the whole British Rail network, you can also zip down and go to other parts of England, or Wales for that matter, from Scotland. So they've got trains that go from Edinburgh all the way down to King's Cross St. Pancras in London. So so there's lots of options there. And listen, I could talk your ear off about things to do as extension programs. So you just need to give me a call. Let me see, a few more questions here. Julie asked about how is payment done on the ship, and are there laundry facilities? Well, yes and yes. So they do have dry cleaning available. So not do-it-yourself laundry, but in fact, like in a hotel, you can send your any clothes in to be done. So that's not a problem. Payment on the ship is, as with most ships nowadays, you will get a shipboard card that you'll when you check in, you'll swipe your credit card. That will open up your credit line, as it were, so you could charge everything on board ship to this card and just settle your bill at the end. Credit card, super simple. Makes it very, very easy. Let's see. Dave asked, how many whiskey tastings will we do? Okay, good question, Dave. I didn't actually count them up. I think there are at least 4 and possibly 5. And here's the thing is that in some of these towns that we stop, we will visit perhaps 1 distillery or maybe 2. But I know from the trip that we had organized for this year that we had quite a number of people who were very interested in that. So you could organize more. If you are somebody that's interested in tasting Scotch whiskey and you take a profound interest in it, then it's quite an interesting opportunity, because you could even deviate from the excursions that we have organized in order to go off and do more tastings on your own. But this trip is designed for people who are either interested in whiskey or not interested in it at all. And we'll make sure we try to accommodate everybody. John asked me about what's the internet like on board. So the internet is not ideal here. There is they do have a satellite internet service on board the ship, but it's expensive, and frankly, I don't recommend it. Most of the time, we are obviously during the day on land, so I would just pick up a UK SIM card when you arrive. You'd have to do it when you arrive in excuse me, in Campbelltown, because the ones from Dublin won't work or at least because of the roaming and all the rest of it. So I would recommend, but I would still recommend getting a UK SIM card, or frankly, your Rogers or Bell card will work if you do this roam like home plan, or whatever it is that they call it. So that for me is by far the best and most cost-effective way to go. A couple more questions here. Karen asks, are the seas rough? Well, I'm not going to lie. Although we do spend quite a bit of time traveling sort of in behind islands and so on, so we are not always feeling the full brunt of the North Atlantic. But when we cross, for example, from the Isle of Skye to the Orkney Islands, and from that matter, from the Orkneys to the Shetlands, we will be in fairly open ocean. May is not a traditionally stormy or windy time of the year, but you will get some movement on the ship, because this is a 200 passenger vessel and not a 2,000 passenger vessel. So there'll be some movement, but not. My experience is this: they've designed the ship for sailing in Antarctic waters, and now those waters are super rough compared to what we could experience here. So the stabilizers that they have, that they'll have deployed, really help a lot with the lateral roll. So, and if you take some patches or some gravel, I'm sure that unless you're really seriously seasick, I think you'll be just fine. Okay, let's see. Going through the questions, Joan asks, how much walking is involved? Not an inordinate amount. In fact, I would say that the most walking that we will do will be in Dublin and in Edinburgh, and a bit in St. Andrews. The other trips, it's really a little bit up to you. We'll take these excursions around from these various ports, mostly by coach, with the exception of, for example, in Tobermory on the island of Mull, we'll take it around by coach. But in Port Ellen, pretty much everything that we're going to see is within a relatively short walk of the port. So it's really up to you how much walking that you want to do. We're not going to sort of walk your legs off. But I know that to really properly explore Dublin and Edinburgh, it's mostly done on foot, and it's more fun that way. But it's not. Yeah. So there is an ample amount of walking. We say in our brochure, where we indicate the strenuousness of any given tour, that you should be able to walk unaided for up to about a kilometer at any one time, without a break. That's what would be normal, and this trip certainly coincides with that. Let me see. I think we've got all the questions. Yes. So good. If you do have any other questions whatsoever, please drop me a note, give me a call, although it's best to drop me a note and then give me a call, because of course I am currently in Thailand. So it's easier if I'm able to coordinate a time that suits you. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have you along on our trip, Scotland by Sea, in May of 2021. But at the same time, you have time. You don't need to book right away, which is, I know, what we're not supposed to say, but let's get through the next few weeks and see how things evolve. And whenever you're ready, we'll be here for you. So thanks for joining us on our Wheel and Anchor webinar this morning, and have yourselves a terrific day.